Hello, this is Hamlet from the Guild Elitist Jerks on the server Mal'Ganis, and this is the last installment in my narrated Gold Challenge Mode video series, Shado Monastery. This is one of the harder challenge modes. It's the longest by far, and that makes the learning process somewhat more involved than any of the others, and even compared to the other long zones, Scholomance and Siege, it has many more potential places to wipe. So following a typical challenge mode pattern, we open with a pretty elaborate pull. It's the 2 high HP wardens, one in front of the door and one we pulled in from the right, the 6 Stormbringers that are channeling on this energy ball, and then about 16 ambushers in total. It can be a pretty tricky pack to heal. The energy ball shoots people randomly so long as there are Stormbringers alive. The ambushers sometimes target onto people randomly. We stay clumped up so that we don't lose damage when the shadows step around, and the wardens can periodically stun your tank, although that can be dispelled. I use Icebound Fortitude at the pull just to avoid any stuns in the early few seconds, but as you can see, there's still a lot of damage spread across the entire group. If you burned a lot of mana during that trash pull, you might also want to take a combat break before Goo Cloud strikes, since he can require a lot of healing. Otherwise, you'll probably still have 2 wardens up as you pull Goo Cloud Strike. Make sure your DPS keeps working on them as you move in and as the fight starts, because you don't want them to live too long. They stun your tank and keep a stacking armor debuff on him. Phase 1 of the boss is mostly about not having people get hit by static field. It can come pretty close to one-shotting them and in general eats a lot of mana, and there's no reason for people to get hit by it. The melee will typically have some path that they walk down a little bit each time they get targeted. You just want to make sure that ranged aren't standing in their way and causing confusion, and that you're standing in a place where you're going to have range on everyone even as they keep moving out of them. The only other damage he does is an AoE lightning nuke, so people shouldn't stand within 5 yards of each other. If you top it off every time someone gets hit by it, then they're less likely to be one-shotted if they do stand in a static field. As he approaches his 50% transition, be ready to move over to the railing. You don't want anyone standing there early, and people should also be a bit careful with positioning on the stairs so you don't wind up with static fields that block people off from getting there quickly at the beginning of Phase 2. When the Azure Serpent phase starts, the tank is going to aim the breaths off to one side against the railing while everyone else stands in a clump a few yards away. This phase can take quite a lot of non-stop healing. First of all, the breath does a lot of damage to the tank for you to keep healing off, and then on the rest of the group you're going to have to deal with Magnetic Shroud. The Shroud puts a shield on everyone that absorbs the next 150,000 points of healing and dots them until it's fully healed off. Each time one is healed off, it spreads some healing onto the rest of the group, but not nearly enough to take off their shrouds on its own. You basically have to aggressively heal the whole group once it goes up. Some classes may have better tools than this, but I'm basically putting up Wild Growth and then single target healing people one by one to pop off their shields. At one point I do use an Alchemist Rejuvenation Potion because the free healing from it pops a shroud off of me instantly. We get 3 of them over the course of this phase, although the third one is cast when the dragon's almost dead, and then it falls off when phase 3 starts, so I really only have to fully heal off 2. That winds up not being so bad and leaves me with enough mana to spare to heal off phase 3 pretty easily. So I actually kind of like bloodlusting during that phase. When we move into phase 3, it's going to be a DPS race with steadily increasing damage. At the beginning it's pretty easy, but it increases as his HP gets lower, so right before he dies there's going to be a moment where the group suddenly starts dropping very rapidly and you want to make sure you're not already behind on healing. I didn't use Tree here because it came back up when the boss was almost dead and I was pretty sure I was fine, but in general that's the sort of cooldown you want to use. The Shaman also used Guidance right after my Tranquility, which kept everything pretty stable. I'm going to drink as soon as the fight ends while the group moves up to pull the first Ethereal Shah on their own. Doing all 5 of the Ethereal Shah in the next hallway at once is kind of hard. You can't AoE them anyway, so there isn't really much loss here. Once the first one is dying and I get caught up with the group, then the tank is going to move ahead and group the next 4. The key ability of Ethereal Shah is that when they get to low HP they start casting a Shah Nova and they have to die before it ends. In challenge mode, if one Shah Nova goes off, it has a good chance of instantly killing multiple group members, so anytime an Ethereal Shah is approaching about 10% HP, everyone has to be focused on it. We wound up essentially single targeting them sequentially and only taking advantage of cleave damage, rather than taking the risk of AoEing them all dangerously low. While the DPS finished off the first one on their own and the tank went and picked up the other 4, he arbitrarily dropped marks on them so it was easy to coordinate. Aside from the Nova, these things do a lot of damage to the tanks. You have to be careful with that when you're fighting 4 or 5 of them. The Shah Blast nuke they cast can be interrupted, so trying to do that as often as you can will help keep damage down. We used our first Army of the Dead on this pack, so that absorbed a lot of them and mostly eliminated the risk of a tank death. Once these are all down, you'll have to run outside, mount up, and ride through the hail of ice arrows to reach Master Snowdrift's hut. The first thing to know is that you have to hug the right wall as you go out the exit here and mount up and go off to your right. It's easier than it looks to aggro some of these disciples, and that's a big headache because then you have to kill them to get out of combat. Dodging the ice arrows itself is tricky. When you run across here to the right, they're coming in from the side. Right as I even start to swing my camera up, I get hit by the first three, which is pretty bad luck. Once you turn the corner onto this bridge, you can look up at them as you're riding, so getting hit by two more there is just my error, although it can be somewhat hard to judge their trajectory. If something like this happens, whoever makes it through cleanly needs to continue running. As soon as he gets to the end, the ice archers will despawn, and when he runs into Master Snowdrift's hut, he can start the RP for the novice encounter, and then anyone can res the person on the bridge. The doors don't close during that encounter, so as long as one person makes it through cleanly, despawns the archers, and starts the encounter, and then everyone catches up as the encounter is starting, you haven't really lost any time. I took a moment to drink before moving in to make sure I'd be able to do it before getting into combat. The novice encounter doesn't really do anything scary as a healer. You pretty much just wait around and help DPS however you can while everyone else continues to kill them as quickly as they can. The only thing here that's really dangerous is their Fists of Fury type attack where they stand still and punch repeatedly for a few seconds. It takes a bit of care to be able to see it with everything that's moving around in here. We generally try to stay loosely grouped, not right on top of each other so that multiple people have to move for the same abilities, but close enough that AoE DPS and AoE healing is shared pretty efficiently. Doing things like stunning them can help you DPS a little more efficiently because it'll keep them from going into parry stance. Otherwise, there's very little you can do to make this faster. It'll end when you're done fighting 24 of them. It takes us a little over a minute and a half here. I'm sure that could be made faster with some DBS optimizations. This is the easiest part of the zone by far. It's kind of unfortunate that a few of the tricky things to practice, Shah of Violence, the Invis Pot Run, the Final Trash, and Terran Zoo all come after it. I said at the beginning that this is one of the harder challenge modes. It doesn't require the continuous tight execution of something like Storm Stout Brewery, but you're going to have to practice this long 19 or 20 minute long routine in which you do all those encounters, so it puts much more of a premium on your group having the experience to put together a good practice routine for a challenge mode zone, know how to come up with and remember a consistent strategy, and deal with things that come up along the way. When you have a routine though, the timer in this zone is not tight enough that it's going to punish you for little slip-ups all the way through the course of the zone. You basically need a plan that's safe for all of the points that I mentioned earlier, the later bosses and the invisibility potion. Overall, this will likely be one of the later zones your group does, and it'll really reward you if you have a good habit of practicing the end of a zone before you get into serious gold runs, so you're not wasting 19 or 20 minute long attempts when people are learning the correct paths to skip the trash near the end or fighting one of the later bosses. With the novices finally over, I drink up to full while we wait through the RP with the black belts coming out. These two aren't really too scary either. Given all the time I have here, I suppose eating an int food would have been smart. We're going to burn down Fragrant Lotus first because she's generally more dangerous. Her fireball can actually kill people in challenge mode, and that staff she summons that beats on people does a lot of damage. Flying Snow in comparison only has her whirlwind attack. It can be somewhat controlled with a taunt when she goes after people, and also, even though it does a lot of damage, it has a very small radius, so it's somewhat unlikely that anyone should get hit by it. I think she can also sometimes de-aggro and run after people, or maybe that's just what happens when her whirlwind ends and she doesn't have threat. In any case, these two are mostly just another DPS soak, a few more seconds that you have to power through before you can finally go up and fight Master Snowdrift. I'm DPSing through most of this when there's only one left, although I'm not using Heart of the Wild because I'm going to get slightly better use out of it on Master Snowdrift himself. Once both of them are down, we again have to wait through a little bit of RP before that wall clears away and we can go upstairs. It amounts to another free mana refill for me, but by and large most of the last few minutes have just been dead time that serves to extend this zone. You don't have to rush to get to this wall in advance or take any risks with Whirlwind or anything because you have to wait a few seconds for it to go down anyway, and even when it does there's no point stampeding or anything like that because when you get to the top you have to wait a few seconds again for the attackable version of Master Snowdrift to appear. Master Snowdrift takes a little bit of care, but in general is not as difficult as Shah of Violence. In Phase 1, all he does is occasionally Fists of Fury and Tornado Kick around him. If your tank has a cooldown, they can cheese a little bit of vengeance off of Fists of Fury if they're careful. Your main goal is to have a plan for Phase 2. When he's going to split into 3, then you want to make sure that there's one DPS assigned to each one, and you can immediately call out which one the real one is. The primary goal of the group is not to start DPSing the real one right away, but to finish off the two fake ones. The fireballs they throw do hurt, and as long as you get them down right away, the room is going to be pretty safe while you continue DPSing the real one. Dealing with the crisscrossing fireballs for too long just tends to be asking for trouble. Also, anyone who's waiting by a particular position for him to spawn can wait behind it and not have to worry about the fireballs from that one. As soon as you see which one is real, your tank goes over to pick it up while DPS finishes off the other two. If you want, you can always have the melee DPS take the position that's where the boss currently is, while range tests the other ones every time he splits. You shouldn't have more than 2 or so splits total if you're keeping good DPS on him. If you get one as he's transitioning into phase 3, then you still have to clean it up. If you're wondering why I didn't heal the shaman at all after that fireball, he died intentionally because he had accidentally used a potion earlier in the fight, and we needed him to die and get out of combat briefly to get his potion cooldown started because we're going to be using our invis pot right after this. I only mention it because it's the sort of thing to keep in mind if you have things go a little awry in a challenge mode. A lot of the time the situation can still be salvaged without actually having to abort an entire run. In phase 3, healers and range DPS have to look out if they get chased. If a tank or healer gets chased, then as long as they're at pretty high HP, it still shouldn't actually kill them. We didn't get a parry stance this pull, which helped things go more quickly. He retaliates pretty heavily if you DPS him while he's in one. And more importantly, the retaliations will stun a melee attacker or launch the boss across a room against a ranged attacker, so it's not really even that helpful to keep trying to DPS him. Coming up after this is our invis potion run, and it's one of the harder ones. We'd like to get all the way to the middle of the wooden bridge. That generally takes a strong speed boost, either aspect of the pack or drums of speed. Stampeding Roar can help, but won't necessarily get you all the way there on its own. If you can't make it, it just means you have to fight one extra pack, but it's completely unnecessary if you invis past. So you have to take a tight route along the right side of these hills and then onto the bridge where you watch for fire. This is a pretty incredible little maze of fire we got at the beginning. I managed to navigate through it, and one other person did, but not everyone did, which means that we're going to get the pull from behind us just as though we hadn't quite been able to invis far enough. Fortunately, the pack at the top of the bridge is just 1 regenerating Sha and 4 volatile energy. It doesn't have any consuming or destroying Sha, which are the much more difficult mobs that we've skipped entirely. If you get the regenerating Sha, interrupt it and kill it while you carefully take care of the volatile energy just as always. Remember to have people move away as they're about to die, try to stun them, knock them back, any convenient way of avoiding their explosion. If we had come out of invis in the middle of the bridge, we would only have gotten aggro on 2 volatile Sha that are right there while we quickly moved up and started fighting these 3 destroying Sha. Without killing that extra regenerating Sha, we'd have been at 29 of 32 enemies right now, and these 3 destroying Sha would bring us up to 32. The volatile energy don't count for anything. The trash packs between Sha, Violence, and Terran Zoo aren't part of the normal enemy count. They're represented by that extra new line at the bottom of the objective tracker. Move towards Sha Violence's building while taking out these last 3 destroying Sha. Watch out for the magical cone attack that they channel on the tank, and carefully handling any volatile energy that you have to pull along the way while you walk down one side of this field. Sha of Violence is one of the most intricate challenge mode bosses, especially as a healer, so I'm going to start describing him now. There's a new mechanic on challenge mode whereby any DPS player that crits him has a chance to gain a stack of a debuff called Destructive Influence. It adds 15% per stack to their damage done and puts a very mild dot on them. You don't want to dispel this off of anyone because the DPS increase is very valuable. The tank can still get disoriented for 4 seconds. However, if the tank has the Destructive Influence dot on him, then the once per second dot tick should break disorient automatically. If he doesn't have it on him though, you have to make sure to dispel right away, or else he'll be disoriented while Sha turns and hits a melee DPS very hard. So watch carefully for whether your tank needs dispels, and don't dispel anyone else. During this kill, I saw Destructive Influence fade off of the tank and occasionally other people for no reason I could discern since I wasn't dispelling it. That might be something I have to look into more. Throughout this fight, healers and range DPS should move whenever they're not doing anything that requires them to stay still. The 1-second cast Sha spikes can be dodged, but they're very hard to consistently react to if you're not already moving. It's expected that people will get hit by some, but the fewer the better. Each spike summons a lesser volatile energy, regardless of whether it hits someone or not. You want to avoid killing these unnecessarily, it just creates more work for your healer. Some are going to die naturally, especially the ones that are in melee, so you just have to do what you can. As a healer, you're often going to have them on you, and you just have to deal with them in whatever way you can while you're running around. I keep things like Nature's Grasp up often just so I can ignore one whenever possible. The boss's Whirlwind still puts a debuff on melee that prevents them from critting for a few seconds or until they've attacked a few times. When it falls off, it gives them 1 guaranteed crit for double damage, so taking advantage of that can help your DPS. We chose to Bloodlust in the second half of the fight to take advantage of as many stacks of Destructive Influence as possible. Although I do still need to find out what sometimes caused people's stacks to reset here because we did lose some DPS that way. The final thing to watch out for is that the boss can enrage at low HP and it has to be tranquilized off. If you're a resto druid, you may be stuck on that duty yourself, but hopefully you have a DPS who can be responsible for it. At the end of this fight, you're already going to be occupied with potentially dispelling the tank, running away from any lesser volatile energies, keeping people up who are hit by Sha Spike, and especially making sure the melee DPS survive any volatile energy explosions and hits due to disorients. As the fight is ending, don't get turned around like I did here. You want to drink right away and then exit out the south side of the room. DPS would like to start the next pack right away because they're still going to have the destructive influence buff on them. The 5 trash packs between here and Terran Zoo make use of the purified defenders mechanic I alluded to earlier. Near each one is that sort of floating corpse, and someone has to purify it by clicking on it and channeling a ritual for 4 seconds that will be interrupted if you take any damage or any other effect. The mobs cannot die until the defender is purified, so it's very important that someone tries to do it very quickly, and they all come with abilities like that death grip that are designed to interrupt the people who try to do it. What you typically want to do is coordinate an AoE stun right as the person is starting to click on it so that they won't be interrupted. You have to clear 4 out of the 5 trash packs on the way to Terran Zoo in order to get credit for the 4 defenders you need. There is currently an exploit where you can get multiple credit by having people click simultaneously, but we're not making use of it in this run. The first pack just had Vestiges of Hatred, which Death Grip. This pack also adds in Residual Hatred with the Circular Ring of Malice attack. Purifying can be delayed if that's in a bad place. It also adds a Fragment of Hatred, which is just another thing with a ranged attack that can interrupt you. Especially on the harder packs, it's definitely best to make sure you get a stun out right as the person clicks the defender. After this pack, we're going to skip the next one. It's quite easy to jump off here and ride back up on that little lip of land and then continue past it in a straight line. If you were using the exploit to skip packs, you could just ride past this one onto the bridge and then jump through the railing on the right side and then ride back onto land at the same point. This next pack adds Hateful Essences to the mix. They're those floating spheres with a circle of shadow damage around them. In this pack, the near one has to be destroyed before anyone can purify the defender. Ranged DPS can start shooting without aggroing the pack, so they should do so as soon as they get there. While they're killing it, the tank will pull the pack away so you can move in and start purifying as soon as it's clear. This time I get interrupted just at the last moment by a fragment. I thought I had it for a second, but I didn't. When I went to click it again, I got gripped back into the pack. This is the sort of thing that happens when you're fighting these and why they can be such a pain. Someone else also alertly went out to try to get it again, as did I, and so we wound up accidentally getting double credit at this pack after all. This can be a high damage pack to heal in its own right, even without messing around with all this. We used an army here to help control it. In general, it's a good place for any cooldowns because it's going to be the last trash pack that you fight in this zone. Regardless of the bug giving us extra credit for that defender, we wouldn't have fought the last pack before Terran Zoo anyway. You get credit for these packs when you purify the defender, not actually when you kill the mobs. So it's fastest, even if you're coming in here at 3 or 4, to ride around this pack, fight the boss, then come back and pull the pack and have people kite it away while someone clicks the statue, and that'll end the zone. You never actually have to kill the mobs. You won't get to see it here because the zone will end when we finish the boss, but it should be easy to do. Just make sure you kill the Hateful Essences. The only problem with this is that then you can't pull Terran Zoo out into the middle of the field because then he can spawn his gripping hatreds too close to the trash pack. So you have to deal with the whole fight kind of near these 4 pillars that block LOS. We came up with a positioning idea here where there would be arranged on each side of the platform, but it wound up being a big mess. They still had trouble getting LOS on the gripping hatreds, and I just had trouble getting LOS on everyone in the group at the same time. So for purposes of this run, we wind up with a very messy clear. An important trick to remember is that if you are about to be gripped, you can meditate and that'll prevent you from moving. That can obviate a lot of the problems that would otherwise arise if grips are going off. If you don't want to meditate for the full 5 seconds, which is often the case especially if you're a healer, you can click off the buff or make a cancel aura macro if it's convenient. The buff is simply called Meditate. If gripping hatreds are being killed consistently, this fight shouldn't be very hard. The only other things to watch out for are range not being at the wrong distance from the boss and standing in his ring of malice, and the fact that the melee group sometimes has to move if a gripping hatred appears right under them. Anyone should be able to promptly interrupt Rising Hate the moment it starts, and as long as that's done well, you almost never have to meditate for hate reasons over the course of the entire encounter. I'm not entirely sure what's happening with our gripping hatred killing here. LOS was probably really bad. I tried to help out a little bit, but when I could see it was going to go off, I had to give up and meditate. Somehow all 3 go off, so I can't even stop all 3 of them. I'm guessing this is a fight that would be a lot more convenient if you had 3 ranged DPS. It is kind of hard for 2 people to kill all 3 of the hatreds in time as it is, and it's hard for a melee to get out there to contribute much, especially because things like Ring of Malice can be in the way. And in this case, our little positioning experiment led to a pretty messy encounter. We'll have to come up with something better next time. The most important thing you want to keep in mind is finding a way to make sure the ranged DPS have good lines of sight on the gripping hatreds as often as possible. You generally want to have them standing on different sides of the boss because the hatreds can appear in any direction. So as we get to the end of this encounter, if you've been watching my challenge mode videos in order, that brings us to the end of the whole series. I do really hope that these have been not only enjoyable for you to watch, but are going to be very informative as you make your own attempts at getting gold medals in any or all of the challenge mode dungeons. For me, these were a lot of fun to make. Challenge modes have been some of the most fun and interesting content I've done in WoW in many years, and I'm always happy to see more people getting interested in them. Thank you for watching.